there, my name's Cindy Davis. I'm the content director for AV Technology. And with me are Stephanie Johnson, Vaddio product manager at Legrand AV, and Bob Griffin, business development manager for Vaddio and Luxel at Legrand AV. We're here to talk about the AV IT conference space technologies for today and tomorrow, because this has been a hot topic and ever evolving. So, let's start off from the beginning and look at the conference space from a holistic perspective. So, Bob, tell us, what are the AV technology elements that are really needed in today's conference spaces?
Well, I think we can boil it down to a fairly distinct checklist of must-haves. There's an endless list of want-to-haves or nice-to-haves. But when we look at the really critical components, I think that adequately sized display or multiple displays are critical, not just for content, but also the participants that are on the call. Good quality audio pickup is absolutely fundamental, and it's the most important part, far more important than the video. But on the video side, we do need to have camera coverage that is appropriate to capture the participants in the space. So that might be a wide field of view for a very small, narrow space. It might be a longer zoom. Every camera benefits from good lighting. And of course, in today's architectural environment with as much glass and windows and unique lighting fixtures as we see in the architectural world, sometimes those are at cross purposes with the conferencing requirement in the room. So having the lighting to be accurate and controllable is really, really helpful. Solid internet connection is critical. Too many of our environments rely only on Wi-Fi for their connectivity. And one of the things that is often overlooked in a conference environment is when 6 or 8 or 10, 12 people come into a room, they all have their personal devices. They might all have laptops that are connecting automatically to the WAP that's in that particular area. And if my conferencing application is running on that same WAP, it's going to suffer because of that connectivity. The other thing that I think is critical is having appropriate furniture for the meeting itself. That might be table height, it might be table design, it might be having cable management and connectivity that is taken care of within the furniture. So, typically the furniture side and the AV side, unfortunately, only meet after the purchases are done and the room is designed. Incorporating that into the planning process, I think is also critical.
All really good points. Interesting that you bring up the furniture, because people don't think about that. And what you also brought up is lighting. People never think about that. It's really critical. You mentioned lots of glass offices these days, right? In conference rooms, and that affects the lighting and audio as well, right? All those reflective spaces. The conference space is evolving to accommodate the hybrid workforce. Scalability and flexibility have really become more important than ever. They've always been important, but even more so than ever. And really, scalability and flexibility mean when it comes to conference spaces.
So, I would say flexibility and scalability. Scalability, I find people use it to mean two different things, and figuring out which one they mean is very important. A lot of times scalability can just mean I want to take the blueprint of this room and I want to be able to duplicate it across my building or install to have very similar pieces. And sometimes they mean I would like to scale the room up. I want to have something in the interim and I would like to scale up the room later to suit more needs, and I need to future-proof it initially in order to make sure that I can integrate other pieces at a later date. So like that planning is not just the current needs of the room, but the ability to add future needs of the room without having to scrap all the equipment and start again. And then for flexibility, I find people are meaning that second meaning for scalability of being able to upgrade the room later, and then meaning kind of the flexibility of being able to have the room serve multiple purposes. So not just like scaling up in terms of like adding cameras, adding microphones, but adding different functionality to the room. So whenever I hear those words, I always try to interrogate what specifically they mean by that, because you definitely don't want to get part of the way into the design process and find out that you've misunderstood each other. Because yeah, those words can have flexible meanings, to use, a little bit of the terminology we're already talking about.
A good point. And I think what Bob had brought up as well, you don't want to bring people in at the last minute, right? It's always been, oh gosh, I mean, for as long as I've been covering the industry, it's like, oh, make sure you get everybody in at the beginning. And that's critical. I mean, from every aspect, whether it's IT, AV, the space planning people. And when we talk about the flexibility, especially these days where just about every room that is in, whether it's corporate space, higher ed, whatever, is really being asked to do dual purpose now. And how does that really work? How do you take a space that not really meant for conferencing, but turn it into a conference environment?
Say that the design for something like that requires a lot of planning and really getting with the customer to definitely understand the full scope of their needs. That is one of kind of the intangibles that, you might not think about when you're thinking about the equipment list for the room, would be, ease of use. I've seen a lot of kind of piecemeal systems have to come together because of part availabilities and some difficulty that's happening currently. And, you put those systems together, and the customer experience sometimes ends up being that the room is so complicated that they end up not really using the space for its intended purpose, right? So the sweet spot there of giving the people in the room the features that they would like, but not making them really opaque and difficult to access, or making them have to troubleshoot 10 minutes before a meeting, plugging something in and, not being able to have drivers, and then not having drivers installed on your computer. Some of the features of equipment that we don't always think about all the time, eliminating USB enumeration issues, things like that, is one of the big design challenges, aside from catering to the design of the room, making sure you have the right cameras, making sure you have the right audio coverage, things like that.
So good points. And audio, as Bob mentioned, I mean, as we've all realized in the last 3 years, really audio is the most important component of any conference. And it can be one of the more complex areas to really ensure that a room or space, that everybody can be heard. So let's discuss that a little bit more. What considerations do you need to think about to really ensure the best audio coverage?
Back to the previous comment we made about dual purposes or multi-purpose space, I think, audio is one of the biggest challenges when you have no idea how a room is going to be configured. There's still no way to totally get around the physics of proximity of the speaker to the microphone. Modern technology has dramatically improved our ability to cover a large room or a large space from a single microphone location. But that's still one of the biggest challenges that we're always going to face, right? Is how the person in the room, the persons in the room who are speaking, are going to be fixed to where the microphone is going to be positioned. With playback as well, when the room isn't clearly defined from its boundary and from its reinforcement standpoint, you're sort of just taking a least common denominator, best guess approach when it comes to playback coverage as well.
Yeah, and I would add a couple of things that kind of touch on some of the other things that we've spoken about, in that, when you have a room, bring your own device style rooms are still popular. Being able to plug in at the table when you sit down and use the conferencing system in the room, and making sure that you have audio and video covered under that same USB cable, making sure you have devices that all tied together in one piece, I find helps with the ease of use for the customer. And the other thing that, we've been talking about like multi-use rooms, but one of the other things that I think we've seen a lot of in our requests for like designs, and it may simply be something to do with the fact that our line caters to it nicely, but divide, combine dual purpose spaces where you may split the space up into two separate smaller conference rooms, either for a local presentation or a conference call, and then needing to combine the room audio for exactly the same thing, both the dual purpose of possibly a large presentation sent out company-wide or just a local presentation, and having both those two audio conditions that you need in the individual spaces and then combining it for the large room. That can be very challenging. We've seen a lot of people move to networked audio in order to kind of make some of those things a little bit simpler. We've seen a lot of implementations of like Dante technology because you can pair, unpair, mute channels, things like that, a little bit easy. It has been something that we've seen a trend towards, for just to talk about other kinds of dual purpose spaces.
Yeah, actually, I hadn't really thought about that, the, divide and combine, because that's really great instance. And I think especially now, a lot more of that is being done. So I think to your point that networked audio, networked AV really, and Dante for the audio has really been a godsend. And especially now, I think with some people still are remote, actually quite a few. And if you've got to troubleshoot any of that remotely, you can easily do that.
It's true. And we also have to worry about combining the video in those kinds of instances too. So big spike in AV over IP solutions in general, with often Dante being the audio component of that.
So what types of scenarios are you seeing where maybe it's a combination of fixed and PTC cameras, or sometimes just fixed?
I would say we've all been in that scenario where a traditional PTZ has been installed in a conference room. And 3 years later, you're back in the conference room and that camera has not panned or tilted or zoomed once since it was installed by the initial contractor, right? And there was no need to, because the camera, as it was fixed, was able to capture appropriately the participants that were already there in the room. The advent of AI capability, and particularly with intelligent auto framing, really is allowing a fixed camera to essentially do what the PTZ was designed to do. By using the AI for that application, and of course, our software codecs are also going to be adding a whole lot of those features going forward as well, you can essentially accomplish the same thing without the cost of motorization, without the bulk of the camera. So it does help quite frequently with ADA requirements for installation. And in many ways, it just looks a lot neater in the environment, less obtrusive. For those conference applications where the size of the room, it can be captured within the full field of view of the fixed lens, I think it really makes sense for a large portion of those applications.
I would also say we definitely have seen an uptick in the fixed cameras, the POV point of view cameras. One of the nice things that I know we've been able to have, traditionally I've seen a lot of POV cameras be either like a standalone camera solution where you can't add in multiple cameras, because maybe you might not want to pan your cameras, but you may want to switch to a different view, like front and back of the room, an education space, for example, teacher, students, right? Without needing like a full PTZ camera, but still wanting like that dual viewpoint option. We have had some nice ability to have a dual camera design without having to get like a full 16:8 input video switcher, just to kind of put the emphasis back on that like ease of use, flipping back and forth between just two inputs for the person in the room who's trying to teach or instruct or present. Getting the technology out of the way to do things for them is very key. And then to Bob's point about the AI cameras, we have PTZ cameras, but then ePTZ, that thing that will it will grab a large image and electronically frame within the image that it has grabbed, so that, say you have a room where you have 10 people having a meeting, and then later on that day you only have 2 people having a meeting. It does allow the technology to just frame down the 2 people, so there's not a lot of empty space in that room, allowing that room to serve. It doesn't just have to be the big conference room with the fixed shot.
Well, there's lots to consider, different types of cameras for different scenarios, and this has been great. So how can folks reach Vaddio?
The way to reach Vaddio is going to be at www.legrandav.com. All the Legrand AV products are there on the homepage, and Vaddio is going to be one of them.
So this has been a really great conversation, and I know there's a lot more information that folks will want to get. So I really appreciate both of you joining me, Bob and Stephanie. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's great being here.